Hey, in this video, I want to compare the parts of quantitative and qualitative papers. So I want you to kind of see that there's a lot of similarity and a few distinct differences. So all of these articles come from the American Journal of Sociology. This one is on how people who take these genetic tests, say like 23andMe, and they find out what their ethnic backgrounds are and racial backgrounds, how does that change their sense of ethnic or racial identity? This one over here is on when fathers are incarcerated and then they start to rack up a bunch of debt, kind of the problems that can lead to. But it's not so much that we're looking at the topics of these papers, is I want us to look at the format of them, right? So I just want you to get used to journal articles, what they look like, and their parts. So obviously there's titles, typically a lead title and then a subtitle. There's an abstract. The abstract has basically within 250 words or so, basically a sentence on each part of the paper to follow. Then we dive right into the introduction. Now, the introduction usually has some kind of hook. Here they're quoting a story that happened in Oprah Winfrey. Over here, there's a kind of interesting statement that somebody has. And it's sort of to hook the reader, introduce the topic, tell you the research question, maybe give you an important statistic. But then pretty quickly, you dive into your literature review. Now, the literature review doesn't usually say literature review. It often is just the title of the content that they're about to start covering, like in both of these cases, conceptualizing race and ethnicity or conceptualizing incarcerated fatherhood. And it doesn't always have to start with the word conceptualizing. That was just a coincidence. And then there's these second level headings, right, that are not all in caps. So you know that these are part of this heading above it. And so there will be quite a few of these subsections. And we know it's a lit review, not only because it's where the lit review goes in the paper, but look how much literature they're citing, right? That sentence alone had 3 different items that they're citing to support it. And every paragraph has several items that are being used to support their claims. And this goes on for page after page after page. The lit review section is one of the longer sections of a paper. And same with over here, page after page after page. There may be a visual kind of explaining their theory or their approach. But then eventually, after several sections, we get into subsections of the lit review. We get into the second main section, and that is the methods section. So here it's called methods and data. Over here, data and methods, with a kind of pre-title. So again, they don't have to be worded exactly the same, but this is where they're going to tell us how they collected their interviewees. There may be a little more information about how they got their data. This person collected more than one type, talking about ethnographic data, going to court cases, and then also doing interviews. And once you get a little bit deeper into it, and this is pretty common, you have a table telling you the demographics of the people that were interviewed. And in this case, these are pretty big numbers of interviewees. 125 people interviewed. On this side, there should be an N somewhere up down here. 100 people interviewed. Right? So these really, many articles might have 50, 60, 70 interviews. So over 100 is a lot. But as you'll see when we get to the quantitative work, there's usually even thousands of participants. So the method section isn't terribly long, right? 1, 2.5, maybe 3 pages. And now we're getting down into the findings. Same with over here, I imagine. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, plus a table pages. So the method section is much shorter than the lit review. And as you're about to see, much shorter as well than the findings. Now, these are both the findings sections, the beginning of telling you what they found, but you notice they start with the topic of what they found. They don't actually call it findings. Now, you can call it findings. That does happen in some articles, but don't be thrown off when you see an article that says something like this, incorporating geneticized identities or the debt of imprisonment. These are findings. They're just what the findings are about. And so they chose to make the headings of the findings section topically sort of what they had found. And then there's going to be, there can be, even though these are qualitative papers, there can still be percentages and numbers that they point out. But there's not a lot of big statistical analyses, which you'll see in the next couple of examples when I show you the quantitative papers. But these also will go on for quite a few pages. There may be, more visuals, but mostly you're going to see a lot of quotes from their interviewees. And when you get to big quotes, it might be like this, sort of in a block quote format. But most of the time, it's smaller, right? And it's just got quotation marks around it, and it's built right into the text. So we keep scrolling down, more and more and more findings, more and more findings, until eventually we get to the discussion and conclusion. Several more pages of findings, more visuals, more findings, and somewhere in here, there we go, conclusion. And the discussion and conclusion sections, they really unpack the findings. So they interpret the meaning of what all those quotes and observations were really getting at. What's the implication for society, for future researchers? And if you get lost in the longer results sections, then make sure you read the discussion and conclusion. They're trying to summarize it for you, and it's usually shorter sections. I mean, here I think we're seeing about 5 pages before the references, and over here 3 pages before the references. So we had that kind of short introduction, a pretty long lit review, pretty short methods, pretty long findings, pretty short discussion or conclusion. All right, so let's take a peek at the, and then of course there's references for both of these, several pages of them. Now let's go to the quantitative studies, one on imprisonment and labor market outcomes, and then another on the growth of income inequality in the United States. So again, we see these abstracts, then we dive into the introduction. This one actually has a title for the introduction. You don't see that too often. You can have it, but often we just assume, hey, guess what? This is the introduction. The paper's begun. So don't be thrown off when you do or don't see that introduction title. And then we're into the literature review. Again, very often a paper doesn't say literature review. It just says the topic of what the literature is they're covering in both of these cases, right? And then this will go on for several pages. Let's look for that methods section. We know it's going to be quite a few pages down. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Oh, there we go. Same with this side. Lots of literature, lots of literature. And there we go, methodology. The subsections in the methodology aren't always exactly the same. So these all caps are first level headings. The ones where the first word begins with capitals are second level headings. And so those are portions of the methods sections. We got 3 pages, 4 pages. Here they're actually explaining the formulas they used and some of their statistics. If you don't understand that stuff, don't worry about it. You don't need to understand everything that went into a paper to be able to understand some of the key findings. And then more and more methods, just a few pages of it, and we get into results. Okay, so in both of these cases, they call it results, which is more common in a quantitative paper. Might be called findings, right, in a qualitative. And then there's subsections, and you're going to see a bunch of figures. Figures are any kind of graph or illustration. Here, figure 1. Here, this is figure 2. But figures are not the same as tables. So on this side, we have figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, figure 4, figure 5, figure 6. It keeps going, and we get to a table. Tables are these rows and columns of statistical output. Right? So they ran statistics on a bunch of variables, and they're telling you which ones were statistically significant. And that's what these p-values are, 0.05, 0.01, and 0.01. If none of this stuff makes sense to you, don't worry about it. We do cover it in the quantitative methods course. And then these asterisks correspond. But again, if some of this stuff gets, if it's lost on you, keep skimming. Finding sections and results sections are pretty long, but eventually, just like in the qualitative paper, you'll get to, looks like we passed it. You'll get to a conclusion section. There it is. And so several pages of findings, and here we go, discussion. So once again, not exactly worded the same. Could be discussion, could be conclusion. It's the same thing. They're giving you the meaning, the importance, the key takeaways of what they found. And it goes on for, in this case, I think we're looking at 5 pages. And over here, 3 pages. So again, those are shorter. And then this paper is interesting. It has a ton of appendices. And so think of it like how much more difficult to read this paper would be if all these extra charts and graphs were put into the paper. So sometimes they're just tacked on at the end for people who want that. And then, of course, pages and pages of references, always at the end of every article. And that, my friends, are the main sort of pieces of these papers. They're really similar, quantitative and qualitative. They have the same title, abstract, introduction, then a pretty big lit review, relatively short methods section, pretty big findings section, relatively short discussion section. Appendices are optional. One of the biggest differences between quant and qual is that in the qualitative papers, those finding sections are full of quotes. And in the quantitative, you have these tables of statistical outputs. And then in the methods section, in the quantitative papers, you might have these formulas explaining the statistics they'll use. And in the qualitative papers, you might have those tables telling you about the interviewees and the demographics behind them. And I'll see you in the next video.